What do we know about the historical relationship between Judaism and Christianity? Today, Christianity consists primarily of non-Jews, and we tend to think of Christianity and Judaism as separate religions. At some point in the past, the two parted ways from each other. But the relationship was not always this distant. Jesus' first followers did not think of themselves as founding a new religion. They viewed themselves as members of a renewal movement from within Judaism. Only over time did a separation begin to occur. At first, this renewal movement separated off and became something like a different sect of Judaism within Judaism, alongside the sects of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and others. And from there, it became not simply a sect, but Christians began to be marginalized as heretics or outsiders. By the time that process was complete, Judaism and Christianity had essentially parted ways and had become thought of as two separate religions. Now, this history is extremely important for Christianity. As F.C. Bauer, a 19th century theologian, put it, the ultimate most important point of the primitive history of Christianity was the issue of how Christianity, instead of remaining a mere form of Judaism, asserted itself as a separate, independent principle, broke loose from it, and took its stand as a new and franchised form of religious thought and life, essentially different from all the national peculiarities of Judaism. So when talking about this separation, one needs to look at it from the perspectives of those involved. For example, how did outsiders view the relationship between Jews and Christians? During the first century, Palestine, the land of the Jews, was under Roman rule. And the Romans, for a time, viewed Christians and Jews as inseparable. In fact, even after the Jewish War of the early 70s, Romans continued to define Jews as those who were, say, ethnic Jews and not even practicing. Such people would still have been considered Jews. Also, non-ethnic proselytes, those who were not ethnically Jewish but converted to Judaism, would be considered Jewish and would have to pay the Jewish tax to the Roman government. This shifted after the year 96, when Rome began to take a strictly religious definition of Judaism, and such that it included only those who were practicing Jews. So after that point, Christians who were not practicing Jews, did not observe the law, kosher, Sabbath, would not have been considered Jews from the perspective of the Roman government. What about the perspectives of Jews themselves and Christians themselves? Well, we can look at this from the perspective of one stream within Judaism, which we now call Rabbinic Judaism. This was not at first the only brand of Judaism. It was one brand of Judaism that existed alongside many others in the first century AD. But what happened was the rabbis who ran the synagogues in different locations wanted to find a way to ghettoize Christians, to keep them out of the synagogues, essentially now defining Judaism as a rabbinic brand of Judaism, such that those who did not practice this expression of Judaism, such as Christians, would no longer be considered Jews and would no longer be welcome in the synagogues. So they had a number of different tactics they used to force Christians out. One was the so-called Birkat HaMinim, or the curse declarations. Now, these would be incorporated into the liturgy of a synagogue, and the curse formula would be something that, when you uttered it, it would essentially have cursed Christ, such that anybody who was a professing Christian would not utter the declaration, and thereby would make himself unwelcome in the synagogue. The rabbis also banned certain books. For example, the Christian Gospels would have been banned books. They banned commensality, or dining together with those who profess to be Christians. So in these various ways, they forced Christians out of their community and out of their synagogues so that they could then take over the synagogues with a rabbinic form of Judaism that excluded Christianity as a legitimate form of Judaism. From the perspective of the Christians as well, there were differences that led Christians eventually to think of themselves as separate from Jews. So while Christians, for example, viewed the Old Testament or the Jewish scriptures from a Jewish perspective as inspired works of legitimate prophets, they also came to view the law as unnecessary. Some viewed the law as simply having a spiritual meaning, an allegorical meaning that was never intended to be taken literally. So all of the circumcising that was being done was never actually intended to be done, but was actually speaking about the circumcision of the heart. There also became a sort of tug of war over the Greek version of the Jewish scriptures, known as the Septuagint. We know of a particular dispute between a rabbi and an early Christian scholar named Justin Martyr, where the Christians claimed that the Septuagint pointed to Christ, while Jews claimed that it didn't. And apparently there were different forms of the Septuagint in circulation, and some forms seemed more clearly to point to Christ than others. And the more the Christians held on to this Septuagint translation, the more it drove Jews away from it, so that they then moved back to a Hebrew or Aramaic scripture to the exclusion, eventually, of a Greek version. So the writings of the Apostolic Fathers contribute to the evidence of this relationship and the process of the gradual separation between Judaism and Christianity. And of particular interest is a writing called the Epistle of Barnabas. So what we want to do is read this and see what kind of evidence it gives for where this relationship is at the point when the author is writing.